Sometimes boxers can clinch a lot, and when they do, it can completely ruin a fight. When we watch boxing, we obviously want to see the highlights. On the offensive side, we want to see punches landed, highlight knockouts, and finishes. On the other side defensively, we would like to see beautiful defense showcased through footwork, head movement, and punches blocked. But the last thing we want to see is this. Excessive clinching, or more commonly known as hugging, can completely ruin a fight. This form of clinching basically eliminates everything we want to see in boxing, such as beautiful defense and good offense. So if the clinch destroys fundamentally what boxing is, why do boxers do it? But before we talk about why boxers clinch, we have to define what clinching is. Clinching is when a boxer grabs onto their opponent, be it an underhook or an overhook, to completely prevent their opponent from punching. When the clinch is initiated and neither boxer can punch, the ref has to step in and stop the clinch, and during this time, punches are usually not allowed to be thrown. So there are two main reasons why a boxer would clinch. The first would be if a boxer gets hurt and has to catch a breather / needs to survive until the round ends. This use of clinching is probably the most common and least controversial to boxing fans because it is used as a last resort, meaning clinching is rarely used throughout the fight. The second reason, and the reason we're going to highlight throughout the video, is if a boxer does this to prevent their opponent from countering or starting up their offense. Most defensive boxers not only do this, but they abuse this. Some of the top defensive boxers will abuse this to the level where their opponent doesn't even get the chance to throw any punches. A good example of this is Floyd Mayweather against Ricky Hatton, where Mayweather would land straight punches and immediately go for the clinch and not allow Ricky Hatton to counter him. Though Floyd Mayweather might be the most prominent fighter to abuse the clinch in this way, I would argue that Andre Ward, Guillermo Rigondeaux, and Vladimir Klitschko all utilized the clinch in this way and abused it much more than he did. But in any case, whenever one of these fighters abuse the clinch in this way, it can lead to fights such as the atrocious Vladimir Klitschko versus Alexander Povetkin, the giant disappointment that was Floyd Mayweather versus Manny Pacquiao, and the weird fight that was Guillermo Rigondeaux versus Lomachenko. Before the fight even started, Lomachenko knew that the game plan for Rigondeaux was to abuse the clinch, and he had to talk to the referee and see what was allowed to get out of the clinch. Another good example is John Ruiz, who many boxing fans believe won his belt due to excessive clinching, and he was aptly nicknamed John the Squeeze Ruiz. So obviously the abuse of the clinch in this way slows down the fight by a lot. In most cases, every 20 or 30 seconds has to be slowed down and broken up by the referee, and in that time, no punches are thrown. This often leads to extremely boring matches and what many fans call hugging matches, and again, it doesn't just take away from great offense, but it takes away from the opportunity of beautiful defense. So I should mention, I don't blame boxers for abusing the clinch because you can't hate the player, you have to hate the game. But what does the game say about clinching? So from the examples shown, you'd probably think boxing just allows excessive clinching, but the rules for most sanctioning bodies actually allow for point deductions for excessive clinching or excessive holding, depending on a referee's interpretation. A good example of a point deduction due to excessive clinching or excessive holding was when referee Sharon Sands actually took a point away from Daryl Hayes in his fight against Christian Gonzalez. Early in the fight, in the second round, Hayes would be warned by the referee to stop excessively holding or else she would take a point away. And I don't know if Hayes thought this was some type of bluff, but literally seconds later after the warning, he would go in for an intentional hold and he would get a point deducted. And this point deduction from Sharon Sands was received with really positive feedback from the audience as they clapped and people online commenting on the video. So if there are rules against excessive holding, then why aren't they enforced? The simple answer is the biggest stars in boxing, especially defensive stars, utilize this move a lot. Saying that boxers have a lot of influence and control over the sport would be an understatement. If you're a returning viewer of mine, you've probably heard me mention that this is one of the few sports where the athlete has a lot of power, and arguably more power than the other leagues and sanctioning bodies. So imagine if a referee were to call a point deduction for excessive holding on a guy like Floyd Mayweather, Andre Ward, or Vladimir Klitschko. I mean, imagine the fallout from a move like that. A point deduction that potentially jeopardizes a star fighter's win would easily lead to that referee being blackballed by a sanctioning body. So per usual, the corruption and politics of boxing continues to ruin the sport. So realistically, as fans, we can't really affect how boxing works, But let's say in a hypothetical, we live in a perfect world where we are able to change the rules of boxing and change how it's enforced. How exactly would we change these rules so that we can avoid excessive clinching and enforce it? So this is my solution. It may not be perfect, but I do think it will resolve a lot of the issues with clinching and will prevent hugging matches. So the first part of my solution is obviously to ban all clinching. And yes, I mean all clinching. I think throughout the video, and for most people, holding and clinching have been synonymous, but before I move any further, let me differentiate between the two. So in the beginning of the video, I defined clinching as grabbing onto your opponent through overhooks or underhooks and completely eliminating them from punching. Holding happens when you only grab onto one of their arms and your other arm is free to punch. A lot of people in the comment section of one of the polls I made about clinching argued that there are boxers who utilize the clinch in an aggressive way in order to land punches in the inside. And the people who commented this pointed to great examples such as Roberto Duran and Tyson Fury. But I would argue with the definition I just told you with holding and clinching that these guys were holding. Because one of their arms was free to punch, by definition that is holding. In the other scenarios where nobody is able to punch and it turns into a hugging match, then that would be clinching. So in my solution, again, I would ban clinching, but I would not ban holding, which is currently banned in boxing. So my reasoning for banning clinching but also allowing holding is that if we ban clinching, this prevents situations where it turns into a hugging match, and by allowing holding, even if the boxers unintentionally get tied up, the action still continues and techniques used by Roberto Duran or Tyson Fury can still be utilized. Now, for the safety of the fighter, I probably wouldn't allow this type of hold where you grab to the back of the head and then send it right into the fist. I think it's a little too brutal, but you can argue it is a legitimate form of holding. Obviously, I would tell referees to allow boxers to work within this holding or work within this kind of half clinch because it would keep the fight going. And the main reason clinching today turns into hugging matches and very boring fights is because refs have to break it up like every 20 or 30 seconds. And I should also mention I did see a potential solution to clinching. I think somebody was referencing Max Kellerman, who said there should be some type of limit to clinching. So in his example, you would be able to clinch maybe 3 times before getting a point deduction. In my solution, I would also adapt this rule and allow boxers to clinch 3 times before getting a point deduction. So this would allow boxers who get rocked to still be able to survive utilizing a full clinch, and I think most people right now are okay with this because it would be used as a last resort. And I'm pretty confident this is a great rule set when it comes to clinching because they kind of have been enforced in the Errol Spence Jr. versus Kell Brook fight. In this match, the referee allowed Errol Spence Jr. and Kell Brook to work within this half clinch or hold position, and both fighters were fairly given the opportunity to fight with their free hand. Both fighters, but especially Errol Spence Jr. within this position was able to continue the action, and there was very minimal interruption from the referee. So at the end of the day, we as boxing fans want to see the action continue even when boxers get tied up, so long as each boxer can fairly punch one another, whether it be one hand or two. So what do you guys think about my solution? I really tried hard to create something that could still incorporate infighting like Roberto Duran, but would obviously eliminate any hugging matches or really boring fights. If you have your own solution, please put it in the comments. I'll continue to upload every week, and subscribe. Peace.